Hello everyone and welcome back to another edition here of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, Christopher Shepard. Happy Friday to you all. I hope all is well. It has been quite some time since I have seen you last. Not since Monday have we had a show during our weird holiday schedule here, but before we get into the true spirit of the holiday season, I come to you with more fantasy advice and perhaps the final fantasy football advice you will be receiving from me this year. We start off, as always, with my favorite Friday segment, start, sit, for your second round playoff matchups or potentially for your championship matchups if they are a week sooner, but most importantly, our final ones of the year probably. Then I'm going to update you on something we'll be talking about a little bit more often here, the college football playoff, specific odds for the top 5 favorites as we head into tonight's first round action. And then can conclude with our Sunday night football preview. First, talking about it from a betting perspective, it's going to be an interesting game, Bucks, Cowboys. Then, from a fantasy perspective, who to start and who to sit, as always, to conclude the week here on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. Well, the week of 2 shows, and then we can get into the true holiday spirit and wish us all a very Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. But before we get into any of the fun stuff we do here on the show, I do want to remind you to consider liking, following, and subscribing to the show on the network if you haven't done so already and you want to view more content such as this. But if you want to contribute and interact with the show a little bit more directly, consider making yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. Great way, as always, like I said, to contribute and interact with the show throughout its duration. You can do it with our website as well at gsmcpodcast.net. It just makes the show that much better, and I love hearing all your opinions throughout the show. But without further ado, let's jump into our first segment of the day, talking about some starts for your second or championship round fantasy football matchups. And as always, I try to be as impartial as possible when making this list, but I know what's at stake here, and I decided to go with a lot of players who have very favorable matchups, but also can be reliable in these kinds of situations. They have the easy matchups, yes, but it's not just about the easy matchups. It's about the talent of the player and how you utilize them week in, week out. And these 6 players at each position, unfortunately, we didn't get to all of my positional rankings to kind of show you my thought process there, but here we stand with my favorite starts of week 16, second round fantasy playoffs upcoming. Let's jump right into them, starting off with a QB. A guy who was pretty obvious is going to be starting the rest of the way for a lot of people who own him, Josh Allen. Going up against the Patriots and closing out with 2 games against them and a game against the Jets, it's very clear and apparent that Josh Allen is going to be very popular and hot commodity among fantasy football circles. He's someone who I feel like is destined right now to win the MVP award, and is just going to continue to do it against this weaker AFC East opposition, going against a Patriots team that, yes, has proved that it still has fight within it, but not necessarily within its own division, and Josh Allen looks like he's going to steamroll the competition these next couple of weeks on his way to his first MVP award, potentially a very important number 1 seed in the AFC playoffs. Nobody, I feel like, will want to go into Buffalo, especially with those wintry conditions like we saw last year, the way this well-oiled Buffalo Bills machine is playing. Yes, Josh Allen's very likely going to have to carry this team all the way because that defense concerns me. But he's highly capable of doing it, and he's proven it these past 2 weeks with 2 of his best performances of the season. One of the first quarterbacks to have multiple passing touchdowns and multiple rushing touchdowns in back-to-back games in quite some time. So he's performing at quite a high level right now that you feel can carry you to fantasy glory. And so that's why I feel like for these next couple of weeks, Josh Allen's going to be very popular and a very hot commodity amongst those who own him and are happy to own him at this point. Then the running back position here. I went a little bit off kilter with this decision. Definitely not someone who's been as highly gifted as we thought this season in terms of how many touches, how many targets he would see in this new look offense, even though new head coach of the Atlanta Falcons, Raheem Morris, promised he would get this guy a lot more touches. But Bijan Robinson has an opportunity against a Giants defense that's kind of packing it in a little bit this season, despite the fact that perhaps their best aspect of their team is their run defense. He has a unique opportunity here. Michael Penix being installed as the starter, and this looks like the perfect game to get him going. But he is going to have to rely on his backfield a lot here, just because I feel like even if we know that Michael Penix Jr. has all the arm strength in the world, this is not like the receiving core he had in Washington, where we know what those receivers were capable of there. He's definitely going to have to be a lot more patient, and thus the screen action, kind of play action designs are going to have to be very effective for him in this one. And that stems from what Bijan Robinson could be able to do here. And if Michael Penix Jr. settles into this game, develops a rhythm, look for him to entrust Bijan Robinson a little bit more. And I feel like if Bijan Robinson really helps Michael Penix Jr. get in rhythm, he's going to be a huge X factor in a fantasy standpoint because of what this offense could look like, because of what might be Michael Penix Jr.'s limitations and what he might need Bijan Robinson to need to help him to do. And so that's why I'm really high on Bijan Robinson, despite the fact he's had kind of a down year. Let's see if this insertion of Michael Penix Jr. into the QB spot helps elevate Bijan Robinson's game to really help this rookie quarterback down the stretch. And in the fight for a potential playoff spot, as they're still in the NFC South race. They hold the tiebreaker over the Bucs. They're undefeated against them. And if the Bucs slip up, which they might and we'll get into later in this show, then look for Atlanta potentially pounce on that opportunity. But then at the wide receiver position, this guy has been a fantasy darling for these past 2 seasons. And down the stretch is really going to be someone who's going to be closely monitored, maybe not just for this season, but for the long-term future of his status as a fantasy asset, Puka Nacua. And I feel like down the stretch for the Rams, they're definitely going to play like one of the most comfortable teams in the NFL. This is a dangerous Rams team right now, should they get into the postseason. Yes, they still have to defeat Seattle in that final game of the season, which could be for the NFC West, but I do feel like in all this buzz surrounding this team, Puka Nacua remains the epicenter of what they want to do. He's the guy who, no matter where he is on the field, Matthew Stafford, I do believe, relies upon the most. And it's funny considering that this team also has Cooper Kupp, who's one of the most elite pass catchers in the league and one of the most elite route runners as well. But Puka has proven he's the perfect complement. He wins 50-50 balls. He loves living in the short to intermediate areas of the field, loves the out routes, also can extend downfield should he need to. And most importantly, puts up points on the board for you. And so, in these games, this first game of 3 down the stretch for the Rams, starting off with the Jets, and what everyone could be seeing as a potential trap game here for how well the Jets played against the Jags, albeit being the Jags, I do feel like Puka Nacua is going to get a large number of targets here and receptions for you. And I do feel like he's going to merit consideration to start in these high-stakes playoff matchups for you. I just feel like now is the time for this Rams offense to really show what they are, prove that they could be a dark horse should they get to the postseason, and Puka Nacua is going to be the reason why a lot of people like them. So look for Puka to make some noise. Speaking of NFC West players, this one who has kind of lost his luster but still very highly viable in these high-stakes matchups at the tight end position. How about Trey McBride? Someone who's kind of fallen to the wayside a little bit these past couple of weeks. That Seattle game definitely did a number on him for how well they covered him. But in this game against the Panthers, which I expect to be much closer than a lot of people would expect, I do feel like Trey McBride's going to be a huge asset in this matchup. These are two very physical teams, two teams that want to play the ball control game, but most importantly, what separates the Cardinals from the Panthers right now is the fact that they have more physical targets like a Trey McBride. So look for Kyler Murray to try and develop that rapport yet again, because the Cardinals, remember, are not mathematically out of it just yet. They could even surpass Seattle here. And so look for Arizona to come out firing on all cylinders, excited about what they saw from the Cowboys against the Panthers after the Panthers seemingly were one of the toughest teams to beat in the league, and really try and get back to what they know best. Ground and pound football with a side of Trey McBride, trying to just impose your will against them, batter the opponent to oblivion, and it's going to be the best Arizona Cardinals football we've seen in quite some time. So that's what I think will happen in this one. So look for Trey McBride to get back to what he was at the season. And then last but not least, kind of a risky one, more of a long shot than a lot of the ones I just picked. We're going to talk about this defense a little bit more in the show. The Cowboys. And I feel like from last week to now, this definitely looks like a much worse pick because of what the Bucs offense did to one of the league's better defenses in the Chargers last week. But I do feel like this Cowboys defense has gone under the radar for this late season rejuvenation. Yes, we forget about, Micah Parsons' importance because of the fact he was injured, and they looked so lackluster without him, even though they still had a lot of talented players. But since his return, this defense has not allowed as much third down conversions, not allowed as much big plays, and really gotten back to what they've done really well year after year with Micah Parsons in the middle of that defense. And that's shutting down opponents. And yes, the Bucs are going to be a tough nut to crack because they're playing one of the most dangerous teams in the NFL. But I do believe that the Cowboys defense is going under the radar. And I still think a lot of people love this defense in a fantasy setting, and they might want to rely upon it in a high-stakes matchup. So look for a lot of owners to really utilize this Cowboys defense, and potentially yourself as well. But let me know what you think about this list in the comments. A potential final start list of the fantasy football season. But coming next, we have to talk about the guys you might want to avoid. My top sits of the second round in the fantasy playoffs right after this short break.